Um, President Biden's speech was meant to be restorationist in nature, and three broad themes were observed. First, that the world is in a potential bipolar struggle of our times, with the world being divided between democratic forces on one hand and autocratic forces on the other hand, namely, but not exclusively, China and Russia. Second, in this contest, the forces of democracies are destined to prevail, but the night is dark and full of terror, so to speak. So it will take a long struggle and many adversities, including preaching to our future generations about the importance of democracy to win the contest. Third, Biden wants the democratic allies, primarily European Union and other Euro powers, but also Australia, Japan, India, and other like-minded partners to join the great contest on the side of the United States. Now, these are the three themes. Unfortunately, the arguments were somewhat simplistic. One, to make democracy popular abroad, one should perfect it at home. With the polarization and anarchy, a lot of Western countries, especially in Asia and Africa, might prefer the Chinese model of state capitalism and law and order compared to what they're seeing or observing in the United Kingdom or the United States. Two, the claim that our current model of liberal democracy is the end state of human political organizing is somewhat ahistorical. And three, we are not moving towards a massive good versus evil struggle or any bipolarity of any sort. Russia is objectively more democratic than Turkey, Saudi Arabia, Vietnam, for example, which are American allies and partners. India is increasingly conservative, but also a counterbalance to China. So we are not going to observe a simple bipolarity or a binary struggle, but we could see an unbalanced multipolarity as the world is kind of like increasingly like 1820s Europe, with one hegemonic power and few other major powers jostling for space. So President Biden during his Obama years was one of the most cautious individuals in his cabinet. He opposed the intervention in the Middle East. He knew that Islamists are not good allies against Assad. But it appears that he's somewhat influenced by his new cabinet now that he's president. He seems to somehow believe that China is going to challenge the US and the US needs to be ready for this bipolar contest, and that European Union would align with the US on the question of China, and that those might all be premature. Asia isn't similar to post-World War II Europe. China is surrounded by powerful states. India is a nuclear power. Japan is a major naval power. Vietnam and Australia are mid-range powers. So China, even if it tries to be too expansionist, will face these strategic realities. It also provides opportunities for the US, unlike Europe in 1945. So Europe itself is hedging on the question of China. European Union has interests which are not always aligned to the US. It's increasingly led by an elite political structure, which is determined on shaping independent foreign policy and often hostile to US interests. So far, the US only has support of the Anglosphere, for example, mostly from the UK and Australia, and to some extent from the other major powers in Asia, like Quad, sort of aligned with the Washington, DC consensus. But other than that, it's more complicated. I mean, there are some structural realities that Biden doesn't seem to have grasped yet. I think he's relying too much on the European Union, which is not going to happen. It's kind of, EU is kind of like a future empire. I mean, it might not align with the US, or for that matter, might not align with China either. It might simply just want to chart an independent course. So these contradictions are there, and this tension needs to be resolved. But how that happens is something that remains to be seen. So the French foreign minister hosted his German and British counterparts in Paris recently, with Tony Blinken joining through a video conference. Iran has given a deadline that it appears that the US is set to rejoin JCPOA. But this was, of course, an opportunity for the EU or the E3, Britain, Germany, and France, to shape the agenda with the delivery of humanitarian aid by boosting trade channels and allowing IMF pandemic relief loan. But of course, in a classic European way, they fumbled it. I think there is a solid skepticism in Europe about not just American future intention, but the entire structure of the political setup. And they're worried just as when they're compelled to side with the current democratic administration, because Europeans fear that this would result in antagonizing the entire other side in a two-party system. Europe cannot ditch Iran. That's not a prudent thing to do. On one hand, on the other hand, they're also worried that they would seem to be too eager to take the side of the Democrats, which in turn would also not seem to be a prudent thing to do given the political system. So it's really a hard place for Europe, frankly. I mean, given the Republicans might turn more towards retrenchment in the future if they feel that European powers are solely siding with the Democrats, and that in turn might have consequences which Europe fears. So it is wait and see from the European side, and depending on the American leadership on whether they're set to rejoin the JCPOA and how they're going to move about it, I think we are going to see more movement on the European side as a follow-up to the cue that comes from the American side. So as of now, it's a wait and see process.